So what about adolescence? Again, at this point, I'm going to say hello to my daughters on the YouTube video because they're going to kill me. So this is my daughters, Lyndall and Gillian, in 2005 at Lyndall's grade 5 graduation. And this is 7 years later at Lyndall's high school graduation. And you can see a lot of changes have happened to these girls over a relatively short period of time. I mean, if I looked at any of you 7 years ago, you would look pretty much the way you do now. I was a little thinner, but apart from that, adolescence is a period of huge physical change. And it's a period of change in sleep as well. You lose 60% of the slow wave sleep that you had when you were about age 11 or 12 by the time you're 16. You'll never go through that degree of change ever again in your life. It doesn't matter what bad things happen to your brain, you will never see that bigger change in brain electrical activity. REM sleep might decrease. Another one of these slides that gets changed over time. Cross-sectional data, where you take people of different ages and you look at their REM sleep, show quite clearly that REM sleep goes down. A magnificent study at UC Davis that's just wrapped up, although I believe it's going to have a sort of a phase 2 conducted by Erwin Feinberg and Ian Campbell, has tracked longitudinal data in adolescence. And the longitudinal data are showing not much change at all. So if you look at the same kids over time, not much of a change. But slow wave sleep very much so. Circadian rhythms are delayed by about 2 hours. And sleep need stays about 9 hours a night. Okay, now this is where you start to get some ammunition to use against your children and grandchildren. We did a fairly small study a little while ago looking at whether we could track changes longitudinally in, you can see 32 young people. And we were able to show changes in delta power across 7 months. And we were able to show changes in brain across 7 months. So this is the lateral frontal grey matter volume going down. So the changes can be quite marked and quite fast. When we started looking at evoked potentials during children, we found out that they had a very, very different pattern to what we'd seen in adults. So these are 9-year-olds down here and these are young adults up here. And this is because a number of things happen in the brain across childhood and adolescence. So when you're born, you've got some neurons that are connected to other neurons. By age 6, pretty much everything is connected to everything else. You've got a very plastic network, highly potential, with lots of potential for development and learning. This is why you need to learn a foreign language and violin and chess and so on when you're 6, because that's when you've got all this potential to do that. Okay. When you look at the evoked potential, because everything's connected to everything else, it pretty much looks the same right across the head. That's what it looks like in the topography. And when we do one of those seismography type maps, it looks very, very different. It's pretty much everywhere. Okay, it's the ever-ready bunny. It just keeps going and going and going and going. Okay. Now, across adolescence, you start to prune back those synapses. You prune them on a use it or lose it basis. So if you've got synapses that are really good for learning Mandarin and you haven't learnt Mandarin, then they go away. Okay. And they need to go away because even though the network's highly plastic, it's incredibly inefficient and incredibly expensive. It takes a lot of oxidative metabolism to run this highly interconnected system. Okay, and it also the head doesn't head size constrains brain size. So there's only so much volume you've got to keep your head in. So if you've got all these neurons and all these axons, then they are packed in pretty tight, and you can't efficiently insulate the axons. So you start to lose neurons, you lose synapses, you lose the axons connecting the neurons, and then the ones that are left that are important, you wrap a layer of fat around, called myelin, and it's like plastic wrapped around a copper wire. You end up with an insulated system, and a much faster system, and a much more efficient system. And at that point, the brain activity starts to look more like you see in adults. It starts to be localized over the front of the head, and the seismic type maps show something more widespread than in adults, but more constrained than what we were seeing in the younger children. So these are data from the UC Davis study showing delta power in REM, non-REM sleep and in REM sleep. And you can see that it's starting to drop off at around age 11, a little earlier than in girls than boys. And then you have this precipitous decline, and then it starts to stabilize around 16, 17. And it's the same in REM sleep as well. Now, I could superimpose curves of synaptic density from pathology samples. I could superimpose curves of cerebral metabolic rate from PET scans. And they would just map right on top of one another. So what you're looking at is the brain asleep accurately reflecting the changes in cerebral metabolism and the changes in anatomy that you see across this period of time. So what about the circadian rhythm change? So this is representing, the dark bars here represent the periods of the time that you normally sleep. So this is in 24-hour clock time along the bottom, right? So you go to bed around 10 o'clock, sleep for about 8 hours, wake up again. And if you think back to one of those earlier slides, this process C, this circadian body temperature rhythm, you're going to sleep towards the bottom of that arousal curve, and then you're waking up when you're well on the way to being about halfway up it. Okay. So adolescents have this 2-hour, on average, phase shift. So they're now in a very different relationship, which has been termed social jet lag, to clock time relative to adults. And ideally, what you just do is shift their sleep time. Move it across. They'd then be able to go to sleep when they're nearing the bottom of the circadian rhythm and wake up halfway up it, and everything would be fine. But that's not what happens. What ends up happening is that they're trying to go to sleep at a point when their system is still very much aroused, and they're trying to wake up when their system is very much still in the doldrums. Okay, so those of you who have tried to wake up a 16-year-old boy at 7 o'clock in the morning will know that it's a heroic task that you're undertaking. Okay. And the fact that kids don't want to go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night is not surprising, because their body clock has them at 9 p.m. Okay, which seems pretty late to me, but not to them. I mean, they're still alert. And then there are other problems that coincide with this. This is a composite NASA photograph of the world at night. Now, if the technology had been available 100 years ago, this would have all been dark because it's nighttime. But now the lights are on all the time. And in particular, kids are just bombarded with ways to keep them awake. Watching movies, connecting to their friends. God, Facebook. If I could stop one thing on the planet, it would be Facebook. My daughter did a life-saving course at the local pool because she wanted to work as a lifeguard over the summer. And she came home and said, "Hey, Dad, that girl I've been talking about, I've been talking to all week." I said, "Mm-hmm. We found out today we've been Facebook friends for 6 months." I said, "Uh-huh. Good. It took you 5 days to work out that you'd been Facebook friends for 6 months because you didn't know her at all." Yeah. But nonetheless, you have to stay awake to keep up with your Facebook friends, otherwise the world will end. And the ubiquitous cell phone that has to be with them at all times. Okay, so what does this lead to? It leads to a huge problem for adolescents. 60% of under 18-year-olds complain of daytime sleepiness. 15% report falling asleep at school. So you've got to figure more than 15% are actually falling asleep at school. And you end up with this problem across a week. So, sleep debt is just like regular debt. It's calculated by looking at how much you've got versus how much you need to have, right? So if you need 9 hours sleep and you're only getting 7, and 7, trust me, is a lot for an adolescent, then after one night's sleep, so Tuesday morning, you're 2 hours in debt. Wednesday morning, you're 4 hours in debt. Thursday morning, 6 hours in debt. Friday morning, 8 hours in debt. Well, Okay. So what? Well, so what is that these are again data from the Davis study showing that this is now a clinical sleep measure showing that as kids get older, they get sleepier. So these are the same kids. The triangles in one cohort, the circles in another cohort. So these kids that started at age 12 are just getting sleepier and sleepier and sleepier every 6 months. And we're now up at 10 at a point where if you were a commercial pilot with obstructive sleep apnea and you still had an Epworth of 10, it's questionable whether you get your license back or not because you're probably not being effectively treated. So we're up to clinical levels of sleepiness. Later adolescence is worse than early adolescence. This is data from Mary Cascadden's lab in Brown. This is the results of a multiple sleep latency test where you give people multiple opportunities to go to sleep across a 24-hour period and you see how long they can stay awake. 5 minutes, that's sort of narcolepsy territory. That's really pathological, and college students are there all the time. How many of you have done a college tour with kids or grandchildren and walked around and it doesn't matter which college you go to, Berkeley, Stanford, the local community college, there will be kids asleep in the library. Everywhere you go. I mean, I should take a camera. It's a very common problem. So this is a survey of 14,000 high school students that was published 2 years ago. And you can see that, it's a little bit hard for me to see the screen. 78% of 12th graders are getting less than 7 hours sleep a night. I said 7 hours was a lot for a high school student. Insufficient sleep, not just for adolescents, but for all of us, leads to increased susceptibility to illness and infection, reduced athletic endurance, real and perceived athletic effort, really bad mood, sorry for the scientific technical talk, and reduced emotional intelligence. So this is my favorite piece. I don't think I've got this slide here, but when I talk to high school students, and there's one girls' high school that I go to fairly regularly and talk to them, and this is the piece that they get. Because not only are they grumpier when they're sleep deprived, they're less able to read the mood of other people. Okay, put that into a circle of teenage girls and see what happens over a week. It gets very ugly very quickly. You gain weight, and something we're particularly interested in here is you end up with drug-seeking behavior. Caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, stimulants. These kids get so wired with Red Bull that they then sometimes need to start drinking alcohol or taking downers to bring them down. Otherwise they can't sleep. Academic performance, there's lots of evidence to show that poor sleep leads to degraded academic performance. This is a study from Switzerland where they do hold children back. 21% of poor sleepers failed at least 1 year of school versus 11% of normal sleepers. This study of nearly 400 Midwest high school students is particularly concerning. This is what the students thought themselves. So 92% had less than 9 hours of sleep a night. 10% had less than 6 hours a night. They were all feeling tired and feeling they weren't doing so well. 6% of them were taking sleeping pills, probably to deal with Red Bull. 6% had started smoking to relax, to help them sleep, and 3% were drinking alcohol in the evening. These are 9th to 12th grade students. Sleep quality and illness. This is a wonderful study that was done in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. You can get people to do anything for science, I tell you. Anything. Absolutely anything. Okay, so this is a study where you had to sign up and be prepared to stay in a laboratory for 10 days, and they exposed you to the rhinovirus. They had you tip your head back and they squirted the rhinovirus into your nose. That's exposure. So 88% got infected. So that's the first good news. You can have this thing actually tipped in your nose and you won't get infected. Only 43% developed a cold. Okay. Now, your likelihood of getting a cold was very much related to how much you had slept the week before you were exposed to the virus. So if you have these are adults, so more than 8 hours sleep per night, if you sort of equate that to 1, then the risk of getting a cold was 1.6 if you slept a little bit more, and 2.9 if you slept less than 7 hours. So you had 3 times more likely of getting a cold if you slept less than 7 hours a night. And this is now sleep efficiency. So if you slept well versus sleeping badly, so less than 92% efficiency, you had a 5.5 times increased risk of getting the cold relative to sleeping well. Perceived athletic effort, again, this is data for you to use on the grandkids, you know. Adolescent female ice skaters, I particularly like them because they train at 5 o'clock in the morning. I stopped weights training for a school swim team that was happening at 5 o'clock in the morning because I had a meeting with the principal that went along the lines of, you've had me talk to your students, you've had me talk to your faculty, you've had me talk to your parents, you know that poor sleep is a risk factor for injury and illness in adolescence, and one day one of your athletes is going to have an accident on the way to weight training at 5 o'clock in the morning. She went, I said, and I'm going to testify for the parents. And that was the end of 5 a.m. weight training.